Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Sumaya Hassan and welcome to Aspire. I'd like to welcome everybody here to the studio today as we discuss education. Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. Rabbi shrah li sadri wa yassir li amri wahlul uqdatan min lisani yafqahu qawli. So in today's topic, I would like us to look at two main things. First is discussing this amazing institution during the golden age of Islam that was called the House of Wisdom. What is the House of Wisdom? What used to happen there? What are the lessons we can learn from the House of Wisdom? What then led to the decline of the House of Wisdom, and with it the Islamic civilization? And what are there for some of the things we can do in terms of going forward? The whole idea of looking at the past is to really help us prepare for the future. We don't want to get stuck in the past, but we want to learn and see what else can we do, not only to reclaim that lost glory, but also to move ourselves forward from where we are. So, following the fall of Rome, those of you who've been reading up on your history, you will know that Western Europe was locked in what is defined or described as the Dark Ages. There was a period of extreme difficulty, a lot of civil strife, a lot of unrest, tremendous illiteracy, a lot of superstition and sorcery and all sorts of negative things that you can think about were happening at that particular time. The economy was low, very subsistence level of farming. And what you then find is that part of that was then used, the energy, that negative energy at some point was rechanneled into other unfortunate events, very violent wars, under the banner of the Crusades. So the Dark Ages really were dark. The Western Europe experienced some tremendous backwardness in the society in terms of what they were going through at that time. At the same time, at that very particular time, Islamic culture was absolutely thriving. The Islamic civilization was at its zenith. The Islamic world was a powerhouse of intellectual exploration, of discussion. And you find, therefore, that a lot of people actually would leave the West, as we now know it, and go into the Islamic world to learn. For example, some of the things that you see being different at that time, the libraries in the Muslim world, the libraries in the Muslim world at that time in North Africa, in the south of Spain, Andalusia, in Baghdad. Remember, the center of the Islamic civilization at that time, we had Baghdad, and then we also had in the south of Spain cities like Andalusia. They held hundreds of thousands of books. Comparatively, the European libraries at that time at most would have a few dozen. That is the difference in terms of exposure to education, literacy, and knowledge at that time. And just to give you a little tidbit of information, you find the rulers in the Muslim world at that time, the rulers in this Islamic civilization, when they wanted to give away books, like to schools, a ruler would give 80,000 books from his personal collection. 80,000. You can imagine how big the personal collection was. You can imagine how big the public libraries were if you can afford to give away, just take some 80,000 books and give to the school down the road. That is the civilization when we talk about a civilization that was steeped in knowledge and in education. And one of the things that stood out about this civilization, the Islamic civilization, is the notion that religion and science, that faith and reason could actually coexist. You see, now we are told that Islam and science cannot coexist. Actually, that is not true. For those who have read the Quran and those viewers who may not yet have had a chance to read the Quran, we encourage you to read it. You will see repeated references, Allah telling us, look at the world around you. Look at the heavens and how they are supported. Look at the camel and how it has been created. Travel the earth and see, because this is a religion that tells you use your mind. Look at the signs of Allah around you to understand the majesty of who Allah is. It doesn't talk about blind faith. It talks about look at the signs and reason. Look at the rationality of how this world was created. So we don't actually have a disconnect between Islam and science. However, we say that science has to be contextualized within the values of Islam. As with everything else, we mentioned this the last time we had a session, that we read, but in the name of the Lord. Bismi Rabbika. So even when we are doing our research in science, when we are reading philosophy, when we are reading mathematics, it is all Bismi Rabbika, in the name of the Lord. And this correlation, the fact that actually faith and reason could coexist, is what then gave the Western intellectuals, remember at that time they were coming out of the Dark Age, the permission, as it were, permission in quotes, to explore the universe without them feeling they're impinging on the majesty of God. Because some felt, if we explore, are we challenging God's majesty? No. He told you, this is my world, and here are my signs. Go and look, travel, see. So there is no conflict at all, but it must be housed and contextualized. At that particular time, Baghdad was one of the world's richest cities. It was one of the world's biggest cities. And this wealth was not only in terms of money, but for more than 2 centuries, it was the home to what was known as Baytul Hikmah, the house of wisdom. And this was a center of knowledge from which intellectuals from far and wide would come. And the center at Baghdad was a global center for the study of mathematics, astronomy, medicine, alchemy, chemistry, zoology, geography, cartography. It was a major center of research, it was a major center of thought leadership, and it was a major center of debate. This is what attracted people from all over the world to come. Among the famous caliphs in Baghdad, and we will talk a bit about them. And here I want to emphasize the role of leadership. They took a personal interest in ensuring groundbreaking scientific works from around the world were gathered and put in the library at the Baytul Hikmah. They gathered scholars from around the world. They brought the greatest intellectual brains around the world into this center. As leaders, they took a personal interest in it. One of the interesting things to note when Baghdad opens its gate, at that time as the new capital of the Abbasid Caliphate, one thing to emphasize about the Abbasid Caliphate is how the rulers under the Abbasid dynasty were extremely focused on pushing the intellectual tradition forward, extremely focused. And some of the key rulers, we will talk about 2 today. You will see what role they played in this Islamic civilization. So the prime site in the city was actually occupied by the Royal Library. You open a new city, at the heart of it, the most important site is dedicated to the library. That just tells you, what was the status of knowledge and education in this particular dynasty. The House of Wisdom initially was built by Caliph Harun al-Rashid. And when he built it, he had actually built it as a library, a magnificent library called Khizanat al-Hikmah. It was the library of wisdom. And this had manuscripts and books that had been collected. Look at that tradition by his father, by his grandfather, yes? And it was in subjects. Arts were in there, sciences were in there, books of different languages were in there. It was an extremely rich library. After 3 decades, the collection at the library had grown so large that his son, this time Khalif al-Ma'mun al-Rashid, built extensions to the original library and turned it into a very large academy. This is the one that was now called Baytul Hikmah, the House of Wisdom. It had different branches of knowledge. He added numerous study centers. He added separate libraries for each branch of science to allow more scholars to come and pursue their research. And he added an observatory as well. Actually, there were 2 observatories that were attached to the Baytul Hikmah. And these observatories and the House of Wisdom had both male and female scholars from different faiths. Yes, the spirit of tolerance was very, very rich in the Islamic civilization, from different ethnicities, from different parts of the world, all flocking there, doing their research, translating books, the Greek books, from Greek to Arabic, and not only translating them and writing commentaries, but actually challenging the theories of some of the great Greek academicians that had written these manuscripts, and doing original research as well. So they were not only centers of translation, but they were actually centers of original intellectual thought as well. Some of the languages, for instance, just to show you the variety at that time that were being spoken and being used in the House of Wisdom, we had Arabic, Farsi, Aramaic, Hebrew, Syriac, Greek, Latin. All these were very common languages in the House of Wisdom. The largest repository of books in the world by the 9th century was housed in the House of Wisdom. And just to show you, again, the power of leadership, I mentioned about this before. Khalif al-Ma'mun al-Rashid is said his desire to ensure that this House of Wisdom was so rich with intellectual material and encouraging translators and scholars. And remember, you didn't want those who didn't have anything better to do with their time to come there. You wanted the cream of the cream. And what he would do, for each completed book, for instance, that was translated, he would pay them the weight in gold. For each manuscript, each book, what is the weight of this? You get the equivalent in gold. So you can imagine what an incentive that was for people to come, because you could see that this could actually be something you could do for life. You didn't have to come here and study and do research, and you're still worried about what you needed to do about your life. We then copied, you found in different parts of the world, different parts of the Muslim world opened their own like houses of wisdom or houses of knowledge, copied on the Baghdad example. Al-Khwarizmi, and I know you've engaged with Al-Khwarizmi before in terms of either reading about him or understanding what he did. He was a mathematician and an astronomer. And actually, algebra takes its name from his works. It takes his name from his works. He, at some point, was a librarian in the House of Wisdom. Can you imagine the caliber of people who were in this house? He was a librarian there. So it's not a librarian, again, you pick somebody because they couldn't find anything better to do. They were themselves world-leading scholars as far as the caliber of people who were in the House of Wisdom. The Khalif himself, Al-Ma'mun, was himself a scholar. He was a scholar in medicine, in philosophy, in astrology, and he would go into the House of Wisdom and sit and engage with the scholars there on the research that they had done. So he wasn't some ignorant leader who was just, come in somewhere on the back of some conquest. He was a scholar who not only understood the power of knowledge, but was very learned himself. The House of Wisdom, the Beit al-Hikmah, had such tremendous impact all over the world. It is from this house that we find manuscripts that were taken, the translated ones into Arabic, subsequently found their way into the south of Spain, which was the other center of translation in the Muslim world at Toledo. From there, they were translated from Arabic into Latin, and then found their way into Europe. So Europe and the European universities, the European scholars actually owe the Renaissance. Remember, we are talking that they were in the Dark Ages. So the move from the Dark Ages into the Renaissance, the beginning again of intellectual thought, was directly premised on the developments in the Muslim world. Directly. However, it looks like that has been forgotten. Yes, not only among Muslims themselves, but also among the scholars, the intellectuals in the Western world. And what we find is there has been a deliberate attempt to try and erase the role that the Islamic civilization played in advancing intellectual thought and discourse, and directly impacting the cause of intellectual discourse in the West, including the Renaissance. We see some 4 themes that have been used consistently to rub out, to erase the history of Islamic civilization in the intellectual discourse. And these 4 themes were said that Islam has distorted the word of God, that Islam was spread solely by the sword, that it perverts human sexuality, and that the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, was an antichrist. And these four themes were used to completely erase the role of the Islamic civilization in intellectual discourse and in scientific progress. And as a result, even though the reality had been that from Greek it came to Arabic, from Arabic to Latin, you see a lot of the texts now have jumped directly from Greek to Latin, while completely erasing out the role of the Muslims in this intellectual discourse. And this is part of what we as Muslims must understand. You know, the only people who are able to change a narrative are the people who are concerned themselves. But we must understand what happened, the glory of this period and the decline of this period. What exactly happened that led to the decline, and what can we learn about this? What can we learn about re-establishing this power? And what can we learn about the causes of the decline that can help us perhaps move away from some of the challenges that were experienced at this particular time? Allah tells us, ظهر الفساد في البر والبحر بما كسبت أيدي الناس. And this is where we will start when we come back from the break, to help us understand what are the causes of the decline, not only in the House of Wisdom, but in the Islamic civilization at that time. What are the lessons we can learn from that, and how can we use that to prepare ourselves to rise again? So we are talking about the decline in the Islamic civilization. What are some of the things that led to that, and what happened to the famous House of Wisdom? Allah tells us in the Quran, ظهر الفساد في البر والبحر بما كسبت أيدي الناس. That corruption, destruction has appeared everywhere, in the sea, on the land, because of what people have done. So the decline of the Islamic civilization, whatever it is that happened in and to the House of Wisdom, directly had somebody or some people behind it. Some authors have argued that civilizations die from suicide, not by murder. It is the people themselves who kill their civilizations. It is not outsiders that kill their civilizations. Not everybody may agree with that, but the point that is being made there is that there are certain things that people change in what they used to do that lead, or that could lead, to a change in their particular situation. We have authors that have said that actually the central factor in the rise or fall of any civilization is very much dependent on the well-being or the misery of the people. And this is not only about economic variables, it's about morality, it's about the psychological situation, political and social issues. If we look at what Allah tells us in the Quran, إِنَّ اللَّهَ لَا يُغَيِّرُ مَا بِقَوْمٍ حَتَّى يُغَيِّرُوا مَا بِأَنفُسِهِمْ. That verily Allah does not change the condition of a people until they change what is in their inner selves. And we see that really, indeed, the change in civilizations, a lot of it is from suicide. It is what we have done ourselves, and not only from what has been done to us. So very specifically, if we look at this great era of the Islamic civilization, what are some of the things that we see happening, both the internal factors and the external factors? We see a lot of moral decadence. We see a situation where there was a lot of dishonesty. We see indifference, we see laziness, we see, over-focusing in pleasures and enjoyment rather than on more serious things. We see very deep-rooted inequalities of income and wealth. We see conflict and disunity, internal strife, this leader wanting to take over from another leader. And so whereas part of the factors that had led to the rise of this Islamic civilization were good manners. It was the following the values, the teachings of the Quran, really focusing on the morality and the moral values. Now we moved away from that and started engaging in things that were other than based on the Islamic values and the Islamic principles. So we moved away from our true basis. We moved away from the Islamic factors that had led to the success. We also see that some of the things that happened is that the Ummah then at that time moved away from ijtihad. We stopped trying. We stopped doing the research. We stopped applying ourselves. And as such, we see stagnation. Science stagnated, research stagnated. So whereas we came from a situation where people were immersed in knowledge and research and intellectual discourse, now it was stagnating. It was more about the pleasures and more about, taking over powers. We became very rigid. We became more tribal and ethnocentric. These are some of the things that led to the decline. At the same time, we also see that there were external factors that were challenging the Islamic civilization. So from the west, we had the Crusaders attacking. From the east, we had the Mongols who were attacking. So look at the external attacks from both sides in an environment where internally we were in disarray. And what you find is that we found ourselves in a situation where the great Islamic civilization was actually being whittled away. When Spain was reconquered, at that time by the Christians, the libraries in Cordoba and Toledo, Cordoba as it was called then, were full of manuscripts and books and, Arabic learning. But the result of the conquest was such that the centers of learning began to lose touch with one another. And this led to a gradual erosion in two very key factors of success. Number one was communication, and number two was financial support. So when we lost the ability to communicate across the centers, to exchange knowledge, to exchange intellectual thoughts and research, when the financial support was cut off because of the conquest, then this again, were part of the reasons why the Islamic civilization really was just sliding downhill. At the same time, we talked earlier about the caliber of the leaders. The leaders were intellectuals themselves, and they had a passion for knowledge, and they invested so much in knowledge and research. Now, the leaders who took over later were conquerors. They were not thinkers. They were not people who were steeped in intellectual thought. They were more about conquering, maybe about expansionism as opposed to the intellectual thoughts. And we see that therefore the support for these universities, for the academies also declined. All this led to the fall of the Islamic civilization. It led to the fall of this amazing culture that was there at that particular time. And in fact, one thing that we see specifically as far as the House of Wisdom itself, the Baytul Hikmah, in 1258, during the Mongol invasion of Baghdad, yes, the leader at that time was the grandson of Genghis Khan, took over. And what did he do? Destroyed the mosques, destroyed the libraries, destroyed the homes, destroyed hospitals, because the learning culture was so entrenched, people would learn in hospitals. Hospitals had libraries. Homes had libraries. We spoke about this, that one of the signs of you being a very refined person is that you had a very large private library collection. This is what people wanted to be known for at that particular time. So families were slaughtered. Thousands of the city's inhabitants were slaughtered. Scholars were slaughtered. And the extensive collection of books and manuscripts that were in the House of Wisdom were thrown into the Tigris River. And it is said, legend has it, that for days after, the river was black with the ink from the books and red from the blood of the scholars. This led to the fall of the House of Wisdom and really the collapse of the civilization as we know it. It was a series of events, but one of the most tragic of it all that really, sounded the death knell was this. So this is the history. Therefore, looking at the glory and the fall, what can we learn, and what are some of the things that we should do. I want to read again the same ayah that I read. Inna Allaha la yughayyiru ma biqawmin hatta yughayyiru ma bi anfusihim. This applies both in the negative sense when it was taken away from us, but it still applies for us here today who want to reclaim it. We have to change our state for Allah to change that state. So what are some of the things we can do? One of the things that we learn from this period is the extreme tolerance that was there. We find Muslims were peacefully coexisting with Christians, with Jews. The scholars from all these backgrounds were under the same roof, studying together, researching together, exchanging thoughts together. So we have to relook at our tolerance levels and expand the space. And this is not just about living and let live, but it is really about wishing for your neighbor what you wish for yourself. So it is about opening up the space for discourse, engaging and discussing, and not locking, ourselves up into little enclaves. Open up the centers, open up our mosques, open up our educational institutions, ourselves to engaging and researching and really connecting, making the human connections with each other, with humanity as our base. I want to propose that we establish a house of wisdom. I think we need a house of wisdom here in Kenya. And I want to challenge Al-Huda. I'm sure the management is listening to this. Can they lead this pursuit? We are here at Al-Huda TV. Al-Huda, we want to challenge you to set up a house of wisdom, a Beit al-Hikmah, whether here, within the grounds of the mosque. That would be lovely. We have the space, yes? And we are saying the Islamic civilization was hand in hand, knowledge with religion at the mosque. So we challenge Al-Huda, set up a house of wisdom, bring scholars from different places to come and engage in intellectual discourse and do research. And we challenge the businessmen, both those who are here in the studio today and those who are listening to us out there. We are challenging you to fund this research. We are challenging you to fund the scholars so that they can apply themselves and so that we get the best of the best coming into this house of wisdom to apply themselves, to do the research, to engage in intellectual discussions and scientific research, and really looking at the different disciplines that can help us reclaim the space of knowledge and education in this religion. I also want to challenge each of you here in the studio, as I challenge myself and as I challenge those of you watching us, to be intellectually curious. We stopped being intellectually curious as an ummah. Where did that come from? That you only read what you're given. If you're in university, outside of the reading list you've been given, you don't read anything else. If you're working, you're too busy hustling to read. If you're, a stay-at-home parent or a stay-at-home individual, you're too busy doing whatever else you're doing in the home to read. Where is that from? This religion started with Iqra. How are you too busy to read? How are you too busy to? Who have we left the Iqra for? We have to be intellectually curious. Actually, one of the things that we should be very careful about is to be people who just take from what others throw away, and we are not intellectually curious to go and read for ourselves and challenge and think and write. Beyond reading, we must also write. We must be intellectually curious. We must start reading. But remember, we read Bismi Rabbika, in the name of the Lord. It doesn't matter what you're reading, but make sure you're reading in the name of the Lord, because that then, Rasul Sallallahu told us that if you set out on a path for knowledge, seeking knowledge, Allah makes easy for you the path to Jannah. So be careful what you read. We now have become people of only reading social media posts, isn't it? We read all the rubbish in this earth on social media. That's not the reading I'm talking about. I don't think we're going to get much ease to Jannah from reading the rubbish that is out there and then forwarding it with a little note there as received. That's not what we want. And they say if you want to learn something new, read an old book. So go back in time and read what the scholars of those days wrote, and let's see what we can learn. I want to encourage you, don't limit yourself to only one discipline. You may be an engineer, you may be a doctor, you may be a lawyer. Read something else. So you're an engineer, fine. Go read about usulul, go read about the usul. Go read about astronomy. Go and read about, another field. Go read about sociology. Expand the breadth of what you're reading, but at the same time, expand the depth. We want to be people of excellence. We said aspire is about believe and act and excel. You can only excel if you go deep in something and really become an authority, become an expert. So go deep in your discipline, but also go wide in expanding your mind. From what we've read here, you see people who are running whole countries, and they were scholars in medicine, in philosophy, in and they still did that. So let us expand our reading so that we really, expose ourselves to a much wider knowledge that is out there waiting to be read. I also urge us to immerse in intellectual environments. Let's be careful where we spend our time. Who are you spending your time with? Rasul Sallam told us if you spend your time with a perfume seller, he will either sell you some or you'll come out smelling nice. If you spend your time at a blacksmith, he may burn your clothes or cover you with soot. So who are we spending our time with? If the only people we're spending our time with are those who are always like this, or are just full of very small talk, talking about people, do you really expect to reclaim a civilization or start another one? And be careful that you are not one of those people that somebody is avoiding you because all they get from you is a lot of gossip and small talk. So be careful that you're constantly seeking to immerse yourself in an environment that is intellectual, that is rich in discourse that broadens your mind and opens up your heart. I would propose that we re-establish the mosques as the center of the communities. And part of this requires us to cultivate gardens and sitting areas so that people come to the mosque and want to stay in the mosque. It's not just a musalla. You pray and you zoom out. Let people come and sit. Let's meet at the mosque. Where are we meeting for the book club? Let's meet at the mosque, in the garden, by the fountain. Where are we having coffee? Can we have it at the mosque? Because there's a nice coffee shop there. Where are we receiving the visitors? Let's receive them at the mosque. Let us have weekly intellectual debates and discussions taking place at the mosque. Let us have halaqas. If you want to hold a tuition class for the people in the neighboring community, why not hold it at the mosque? Let's start holding, I don't have a venue. You do, the mosque is there. And people used to study everything from mathematics to grammar in the mosque. We can do the same. Have a weekly tuition class for the little kids in your neighborhood at the mosque. You make them love the mosque. You're reviving the spirit of knowledge in the mosque. And we are really then setting out on the path to claim our tradition. At the same time, let us host a conference on Islamic inventions. How many inventions came out of Islam? I just read that somebody was talking about a star that was discovered, that there is a planet that orbits around another star other than the sun that we know. And this star is called Fom al-Haut. And they wondered, where is this name from? Actually, it's an Arabic name. Fom, the mouth, al-Haut, the mouth of the fish. That was where that star, the name came from. So we have these scholars, the astronomers who used to sit there mapping out the skies, naming the stars, and the names are in use up to today. We've moved from there, and now the only time we look at the sky is twice a year when we're looking at the moon, and the only purpose for doing that is so that we can fight about it. You look at the moon twice a year, and you think you're an authority on whether this is day 1 or day 2. What do you know about the moon? Looking at it once a year. And finally, I want to also encourage the business people to come in and fund startups on innovations, on competitions, on scholarship, so that we really focus on reviving this culture and making it affordable for people who want to study, but also make it lucrative for somebody to leave what they're doing and apply themselves to research and scientific discovery. Ladies and gentlemen, at this point, we will take a break, and when we come back, we will open up the session to questions from our audience, and those of you at home are welcome to send us your comments and questions via any of our social media handles that are streaming at the bottom of the screen. Who will start our question session? Okay.
Assalamu alaikum. My name is Bakari Samir. I get the impression that one of the major factors of Islamic intellectual civilization was strong leadership, intellectual leadership. So how are we going to recover that tradition if we're lacking leadership today?
Okay, let's take a series of questions, then we can answer them together.
Assalamu alaikum.
Alaikum salam.
My name is Athman Abubakar. So during the talk, you talked about the fact that we used to come from, a position where we were reading and we had very many books back in the day, and nowadays it's all about, phones, internet, nini. So my question is, talking about us going back to that time where people were all reading, but that time it was on books. Nowadays we have very many books, we have them also on the phones and gadgets, but the problem is, are these trusted sources? Those are among the problems being faced currently. And telling us that, we should go back into reading, but now going into books again, yet we're trying to go into the future, then that brings about a problem. So what do you think needs to be done for that? Because, with the gadgets comes about space. Do we really need 10 acres just for us to put up libraries, and we can store that in servers somewhere, and people can access those books on phone and all the other gadgets? So what do you think should be done in regards to that?
Okay, thank you for that.
Assalamu alaikum. My name is Hassan Mahmoud. From what you have been saying, I get that there are three elements that come out. One is religion, then we also have leadership, and then we also have the aspect where the commitment from the leaders. Looking at it from the current, how then do we balance between religion and the social life that we currently have with regard to morality? Having it in mind, the development of the House of Wisdom was measured on the value of Islam, which is an aspect of morality. Thank you.
Okay. Yes, next question.
Hello, my name is Ramadan Mohammed, and just from what you've presented earlier on, if you look at the Baghdad back then, the reading culture was high, yeah? But if you fast track now to where we are now in Kenya, the reading culture is very, very low, tremendously low, especially among the youth. You look at our current universities, the reading culture, people read content just for passing exams. Even the value of education as at now is not what it used to be back then. So how now then do we bring up the reading culture and inculcate it within our youth so that at least we can reclaim our lost glory? Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Assalamu alaikum. I'm Ali. As you said that education, it's not cheap, it's very expensive, and we need businessmen who can help the youth. Considering the level of unemployment and the high levels of education, in the universities we have a lot of students, but outside the universities there are no career opportunities or anything. From that point, what can we do so that we can establish a place whereby we have education and plus there's employment for whatever you have studied? Thank you.
Okay. Do we have any other questions? We take the final one.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Mine is not a question but rather a comment. From what she has said is that we learned that we need to hold into our religion, because if we hold into our religion, it will guide us, because I have the belief that Islam is a lifestyle. So as long as we go as per Islamic teachings, then there's no way we are going down. We hold to it and the guidelines which we've been given. Even with that, we'll even improve the moral values and also the aspect of leadership. Shukran.
Thank you. Any further questions? Okay, so let's take those ones. Thank you very much for those questions. Bakari Samir asked that if the strong intellectual leadership is one of the keys to the success of the Islamic civilization that we had, how do we then go about recovering that tradition without that strong intellectual leadership? Indeed, this is part of the challenge that we see in different sectors across the globe, I dare say, in different parts, different countries, different backgrounds. As far as we are concerned, my response to this would be, we need to start from where we are. Part of the challenge is, who are the people that we are bringing into leadership? Traditionally, Islam takes the view that, as far as leadership is concerned, we don't give it to those who ask. That in itself is a sign that you don't deserve it because you want it. We should be looking for the people to say, Bakari, I think you have the qualities that the community needs. Can you be a leader? This is part of what we will need, to rethink how we choose our leaders in terms of actually engaging and grooming people and supporting them to run for leadership. But while we are waiting to do that, we need to make the change from each one of us. It will take each one of us joining hands together, and each drop coming together, from there the stream will flow. So at our individual level, if we start, because where will the pool of leaders come from? Are the individuals themselves intellectually sound? Are we those people of strong moral values, so that there is a pool from where we can choose our leaders? If we are not those people, then really we get the leaders that we deserve, because the leaders then end up reflecting the society generally as it is. So I think it really we need to start with us at our small individual level, building this up, and through that, through setting up some of these institutions and our think tanks, that we then start grooming the type of leaders that we would want to take over. Mustafa Mahmoud, if the three stones of this particular, the three sort of traditional stones, or the three points, the three pillars, religion, leadership, and commitment of the leaders, how then do we balance the social aspects plus morality in the house of wisdom? Again, we will have to remind ourselves that we are not reading just for the sake of reading. We are reading for the purpose of enabling us to know God better, so that we can worship Him better. And therefore, that is why everything we read is Bismi Rabbika. And this has to be the basis on which our educational institutions are set up. That we will go back to Iqra, but Bismi Rabbika. Whatever we read has to have that as the foundation. And if we do that, and one very easy example I like to give is that any time you have something in front of you you want to read, say Bismillah. If you find it difficult to say Bismillah because of the content of what you're about to read, you know you shouldn't be reading it. It's a very small test you can do for yourself. Just say Bismillah. If you see, oh gosh, I can't do this, you shouldn't be reading it, you see. So that's a very simple thing to do. Okay, Athman, we used to read, but now, it's all about the phones. The books are online. The sources are, are these sources trusted? We are trying to go into the future. Do we really want to use acres for physical libraries, or should we go digital? I think that's very good input in terms of how do we learn from the past and how do we use that as a stepping stone into the future. Because the reading doesn't have to only be hard copy books. We can read online. But I like the point you've put there. How do we even know that it's a trusted source? There's a lot of rubbish out there. Now maybe that could be one of the things that the House of Wisdom does. It actually does a sort of verification exercise. Which are the books and which other, which sources here are cleared as having been verified and written by proper, authors and scholars and writers, and which is just rubbish or plagiarism from somewhere that really is not housed on or based on any intellectual, foundation. And this could be one of the key things, particularly in the digital era that we are on. And the idea here is, let us leverage. We want not only to go into the future, we want to lead that charge. But let us learn from where we are and prepare. We don't want to be backward. That's not our history. We were not backward. But what can we learn from there in terms of helping us move forward? Halima Ali asked, education is expensive, and considering the very low levels of education, what can we do so that not only do we have educational institutions but also job opportunities? We have to be employment creators. That should be our focus, that you're not studying to get a job, you're studying to create jobs. And part of what, therefore, we need to study within these institutions, in the spirit of reviving this culture, is really looking at what are the disciplines of the future. Where is the world going, and what should be our role in participating in this, so that we really are at the forefront. But remembering as well that the whole area around education is in itself a big employment creator, because we want people to immerse in doing research. We want people to not only research but be inventors. Again, looking back at the history, not only did they research, not only did they look at mapping the stars and the planets out there, but they created the equipment, the instruments that were used for doing that. The astrolabs and all sorts of other equipment were actually created by Muslim scientists and Muslim scholars. So let's do that. Let's go back to being inventors. Let's go back to being people who actually create and innovate things for the benefit of the humanity, and not just people who are net recipients. We just take, from what other people have done. And within that, a lot of other opportunities will be created, not only for us, but for those people who are serving these institutions, these institutes. Ramadan Muhammad highlighted how reading culture is very low within our educational institutions, and people read just to pass exams. So how do we bring this up? We need to change the idea of reading. Why do we read? So the idea that you're reading to expand your mind, the idea that you're reading because you want to prepare yourself as part of your research to write your own book. We need to change some of the things we are doing, that we want to be authors ourselves. So let us read as part of the research we are doing for our own writing. Not only books, but blogs and other articles that maybe you become a weekly contributor somewhere to a magazine, to a newspaper, whatever it is. So we're reading because of that, so that we become authors. Let us also form book clubs. I really encourage you, let us form book clubs where we deliberately get together with like-minded individuals, and even those who are not like-minded, they've never read a book before, but because you have invited them into that space, they are happy to come. So let us read and then have our own book clubs where we sit and talk, we sit and share, we sit and think about some of these things. Do we agree? Let us also read to write commentaries, because if you're going to write a commentary on something, it means you've really read it, you've understood it, you're commenting, you're adding your own thoughts, you're challenging what is in there. So let us change the reason why we read. We are not only reading to pass exams, but we are really reading because one of the pillars of civilization is having a learned and knowledgeable and educated community, and we want to be at the heart of that. The final question we had from it wasn't a question, but Khairun Nisa commented that actually if we hold on to this faith, which is a way of life, then we will succeed, because really it is all in there. I think that's a very good point for us to wind up today's show, that when we look at the success of the Islamic civilization then, it was underpinned by morality, it was underpinned by the Islamic values, it was underpinned by following the teachings in the Quran and the Sunnah, and with that, they were ready to conquer the world. Now the good news is, the Quran that they were reading is the same one we read today. The hadiths they were reading are the same hadiths we're reading today. The values that they were espousing are really the same values, yes, set out by the Prophet ﷺ as highlighted in the Quran, yes, that we have today. So we don't have to reinvent that. We need to take that. We need to reclaim that. That's what we need to do. We need to reclaim our heritage so that then we position ourselves to really lead the charge into the future. Thank you very much, audience. Thank you very much, the viewers at home, for joining us here today. We still look forward to receiving any comments you may have on this show through any of the channels at the bottom of the screen. And I invite you to join us again next week for the next session of Aspire. Wassalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.